And we're going to do stuff a little different like they did in the olden days. So, if I can explain this briefly, we're going to do a reading of a book, and we're going to read by candlelight. So I want to say welcome to the very first reading. Okay, just like that. So I need to play with the candles to try to figure out the right ambiance. I don't know. All right, so I'm going to attempt to read this book by candlelight. And I have no, yep, you can't even see the book. How you like that? So I need to get sous chef over here to help me out. Hey, Lebu, come see, please. Yep, take a little sip of my, ooh, coaster got stuck. All right. So how does this look? And what do I need to do? Is it enough light? What do you think? Do I need to move the candles?
Seems like enough to me.
It's enough light? Okay. All right. So let's see. I can't see. So maybe I should move this little one right here. That might be better for me. Yeah. So the name of this book is called Shen Fu. And it was a good book according to Sous Chef. 6 Records of a Floating Life. So I want to show the book to you. And I've never read it. But this is what the back of the book says. I learned all these words. I touched Yun's old clothes and smelled the fragrances of her that still lingered in them. 6 Records of a Floating Life, 1809, is an extraordinary blend of autobiography, love story, and social document written by a man who was educated as a scholar, but earned his living as a civil servant and art dealer. In this intimate memoir, Shen Fu recounts the domestic and romantic joys of his marriage to Yun, the beautiful and artistic girl he fell in love with as a child. He also describes the other incidents of his life, including how his beloved wife obtained a courtesan for him and reflects on his travels through China. Shen Fu's exquisite memoir shows 6 parallel layers of one man's life, loves, and career, with revealing glimpses into Chinese society of the Qing dynasty. This lyrical translation conveys all the descriptive immediacy of the original. The introduction describes the ways in which the book offers a unique insight into family life, government, and the powerful role of the courtesan in 19th century China. This edition also includes a chronological map and notes. So that's the book we're going to read, and I'll show you the name again. It's called Shen Fu, 6 Records of a Floating Life. And I always wanted to read publicly because I think reading is power. And it's also a nice hobby. I am not a professional reader, and I have not read this book, and so this is going to be the first time. And because I've been out of school so long, I don't know what all of this stuff is called. But anyway, 6 Records of a Floating Life. Advisory Editor, Betty Radice. Leonard Pratt began his Chinese studies as an undergraduate at the University of Michigan and continued them in the graduate and fellowship programs at Columbia University. He furthered his Chinese language studies in Taiwan from 1969 to 1974, and he is now the bureau chief of NBC News in Hong Kong. Chang Su-hu was born and educated in Taiwan. She has a degree in Chinese law and has worked as an educator, writer, and broadcaster. Shen Fu, Six Records of a Floating Life, translated with an introduction and notes by Leonard Pratt and Xiang Su Hui, Penguin Books. Okay, the contents. Now the heavens and earth are the hassles of creation, and time has seen a full 100 generations. Ah, this floating life, like a dream. True happiness is so rare. Lipo on a banquet with my cousins on a spring night in the peach garden. Introduction. Shen Fu was born in Sochao in the later part of the 18th century, at the height of the Qing dynasty. He was a government clerk, a painter, occasional trader, and a tragic lover. And in his mid-40s, he set out his life in 6 moving records that have delighted the Chinese ever since they came to light in the 19th century. While it is much more, the 6 records is known among the Chinese as a love story. As such, from a Western point of view, it is unique, for though it is indeed a true love story of Shen Fu and his wife, Yun, it is a love story set in a traditional Chinese society, and thus their love coexists and intermingles with Shen Fu's affairs with courtesans and with his wife's attempts to find him a concubine. And yet, for all that, it is nonetheless love. The role of the courtesan, as described in the 6 records, is an example of what makes the book a valuable social document. It is difficult for Westerners to understand just what a courtesan in China was, because the only equivalent we have for the role is a prostitute. But a courtesan, properly called, was it respectable and respected, and her sexual favors were by no means necessarily for sale. As Van Gulik has described in his classic Sexual Life in Ancient China, Humanities Press, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, 1974, a courtesan could often be more independent and powerful than the men she ostensibly served. It is this kind of small but significant alteration to our perception and presumptions which the 6 records can affect that makes it so important a book for Westerners. Chinese readers find something else in it. It must be recalled how common arranged marriages were among the Chinese until quite recently. Even now, a great deal of parental influence or economic or social coercion is still present as an influence in the choice of marriage partners in many Chinese societies. And so a book arising out of the imperial literacy tradition that extolled enduring romantic love easily became and has remained a favorite among Chinese readers. It has recently been released in China by the People's Literature Publishing Society and is certainly the first primarily romantic book to come out of China for decades. Shen Fu has described his life with his wife in what is probably the most frank and moving story to come to us from the literature of his time. He has given us a remarkable picture of Yun, his child love, and his wife. Her life was hard, but she played on all of its graces, and Shen Fu's portrait of her manages to infuse the great tenderness into what is one of the most realistic accounts of the life of a woman ever given in traditional Chinese literature. The book's remarkable frankness is broader than that. However, official literature of the imperial period, of course, tells us a little of daily life of the more ordinary Chinese people. Novels, plays, and tales of mystery do tell us a bit, but are often so taken up with details of their plots that there is little space left over to tell how people living in China then actually spent their time. The six records does tell us in great detail what, while managing to avoid many of what must seem to Western readers to be convolutions that plague so much Chinese popular literature of the time. Fortunately for us, Shen Fu accomplished a rare feat in traditional China. He became literate without becoming a literus. Shen Fu, by his standard and by our own, a conspicuous failure in many ways. The highest he rose officially was to the position of private secretary to a powerful friend, a role that fell to many luckless literate of the Qing. He was not much of a painter. He was a poor businessman, frequently in debt, and by the end of his book, he seems to have become entirely estranged from his family. Yet while he was so often a victim, he was still determinedly upright when the chance to be so came his way. He resigned one official post in disgust at his colleagues' misdeeds, and he is gentleman enough not to tell us what they did, so that upset him. He restored a pleasant girl to her family when a man of influence was trying to force her to become a concubine. He was a trusting friend, often to his cost. If Shen Fu was a failure in so many ways, much of his failure was related to the class from which he came, the Yamen private secretary. The secretaries in a Yamen, a government office, were failures almost by definition. The origin of the profession of Yamen secretary lay in two uniquely Chinese administrative practices. The first was a rule against assigning magistrates to their home districts. Throughout the post-feudal Chinese dynasties, this was a standard means of attempting to ensure that officials administered their districts honestly, unswayed by local loyalties or favorites. The second practice arose from the Chinese determination that government officials should be scholars first and bureaucrats second. One of the largest empires in the history of the world was administered by a small group of men who, prior to their first assignment, had not had the slightest training in administration, and who knew more about the poetry of 1,000 years before than they did about tax law. The typical Chinese magistrate therefore found himself in a district of which he had little personal knowledge. Indeed, he might be woefully ignorant even of the local dialect of the language, and with only the slightest acquaintance with the complex laws and customs by which he was supposed to carry out his manifold responsibilities. He needed help, and he found it in the private secretary. Literate and technically skilled, the private secretary was the magistrate's link between the scholarly ethics and the practical realities of the imperial Chinese government. Tung Su Chu, Local Government in China under the Qing, Harvard University Press, 1962, divides the secretaries into 7 categories of specialists: law, tax administration, tax collection, registration of documents, correspondence, preparation of documents, and bookkeeping. It is nowhere stated clearly in the 6 records, but Shen Fu seems to have specialized in law, the most prestigious of the 7. The secretaries prepared almost every document a magistrate saw. They recommended decisions for him, handled virtually all of the official correspondence, helped organize court sessions, and drafted replies on behalf to official queries. About his actions, which probably had been recommended by themselves in the first place. The quality of his secretaries could make or break a magistrate's career. They were very powerful. They were also very unofficial, except for one brief and unsuccessful experiment. The Qing dynasty never officially recognized their existence. They were the employees of the magistrate, not of the government, recruited by him and paid out of his personal funds. They were well paid. Chu estimates they were the only members of a Yamen staff able to support themselves on their salaries, and well respected. Whenever Shen Fu records going to work for a magistrate, he describes himself as being invited to take the position. This is not an affection. Once employed, the secretaries were far more than servants. Resignation and protest was far from uncommon, and, as noted above, Shen Fu himself seems to have done it at least once. Who were the private secretaries, and where did they come from? Since they were well educated, they had to be in order to do their jobs. Most had one or more occasions taken the examination, which were the natural culmination of the education system of the day. If they had passed those examinations, and some of course did, they would have become officials themselves rather than secretaries. We're talking therefore about a group of men who had either denied or had been denied entrance to the scholar official class, men who had studied for the highest posts and failed to attain even the lowest. It must have been a painful situation raised in the traditions of China's greatest poets and administrators. They were forced to live the only life their world offered them. Itinerant and temporary employees, their only domain, the shadowy world of yamen clerks. Their only power that derived from their patron towards whom it would have been only natural to feel a certain amount of jealousy. All this must be kept in mind in considering what sort of man Shen Fu was, for it must be admitted that on the surface there are a fair number of unpleasant things about him. Perhaps the most difficult to understand is his repeated failure to provide for his family, apparently because it might not fit in with his image of himself. When his wife was ill and needed medicine, for example, he opened a shop to sell paintings, which he admits bought in enough money to buy part of the medicine she needed. Rather, we must unkindly note than taking on a lower status job that might have given him a more than occasional income. Such facts are quite unquestionable. Shen Fu himself sets them out, though not as harshly as we have just done. So how much of a scoundrel was he? We leave that for the ultimate judgment of the reader. But we do think there are several points that ought to be remembered in making that judgment. True, Shen Fu was a terrible romantic, a dreamer, often a victim of self-deception. But it should be noted that the education he received was intended exclusively to fit him for a part in life as a scholar administrator. And beyond that education, no one of his class had much training at all. True, Shen Fu seems to us to cling to that education long after it has become irrelevant to his life. But perhaps he simply believed its promises, or was more entrapped by its graces than others would have been. On a more practical level, it is worth asking what other profession he would have been suited for had he decided to try to find something else to do. Or for that matter, what other profession his all-powerful parents would have allowed him to take up. While granting all his personal faults, it seems to us that Shen Fu's inability to assume responsibility was not really due to them. He was dealing with a difficult life, with the only set of rules he understood. His tragedy was that they were not enough to see him through. It was the same tragedy that a few decades after his book was written began to overtake all his countrymen. The original text of the book, as we have it today, is incomplete. The last two of the 6 records were lost before a manuscript of the book was discovered and published for the first time in the 1870s. During the 1930s, the World Book Company published in Shanghai what it claimed was a complete text of the book, discovered by one Wang Chu-un-ching in Soochow. In this form, the book was recently going through several impressions in Taiwan. The last 2 records which it presents are known to be false. However, having been copied from works by other authors, details of these forgeries appear in two brief appendices to this translation. Apart from these pieces of information, we can add only the testimony of Shen Fu himself that he was working on the book in 1809. The quality of the book presents some challenges. By his own admission, Shen Fu was not always the most explicit of writers. There are references in the book that are not clear, some that make little sense. Sometimes his facts are not consistent. There are also great differences between our modern ideas and Shen Fu's of just what a book ought to be. The Six Records is not the chronologically constructed tale that we are now used to be reading. Instead, Shen Fu takes particular topics and follows them each through his life, one at a time. The book is thus intended to be six different layers that add up to a floating life, each layer having a little regard for its relationship to any other. Where we expect transitions, Shen Fu gives us few, and where we expect logical explanations, he often gives us none. Sentences frequently stand almost by themselves. The book is meant to be mused over, and by our standards, read very slowly. There is much that is left unsaid. What is said, however, is rich in the life of the times. The troubled black sheep of a declining family, Shen Fu has left us a lively portrait of his era that in places strikes chords which are remarkably resonant with those of our times. It would be unusual if such a work had not come to the attention of translators before Lin Yutang first translated the book in 1935, when it was serialized in the Ting Sa Monthly and in Sa Fing. His translation of the entire book was appeared in several editions with the greatest respect for our predecessor. However, we felt like there was room for a full translation of the Six Records into modern English, which would, by the use of extensive, but we hope not intrusive notes and maps, present the modern English reader a more complete exposition of the tale that Shen Fu told. He wrote for an audience of his own time and place, and neither of those will ever live again. We hope that our contribution to this work may help it to live in the minds of our Western readers, as its author intended it should live in the minds of his contemporaries. We have tried to provide a complete translation that is, in the words of Anthony C. Yu, the most intelligent fidelity to the original. Corrections to our work are inevitable, and we welcome them with the respect which is due to the original. Pardon me, I'm a little parched. Chronology. When Shen Fu wrote the Six Records, he made little attempt to organize the story of his life chronologically. For readers who may find it helpful, the following is taken from information provided in the book. Okay. 1763. Shen Fu was born 10 months after his wife-to-be. 1775. He met Yun for the first time, and his mother arranged their marriage. They were 13 years old. The affair of the rice porridge occurred in this year. 1778. He began his travels around Hangzhou while studying there. He took some examinations during his time. 1780. Shen Fu and Yun were married at the age of 17. 1781. His father fell ill, and Shen Fu was introduced to the profession of Yamen private secretary. In the winter of this year, he met his friend, the short-lived Hung Kan. 1783. He accepted a position at the Weiyang Yangchu, apparently his first independent posting. 1786. Yun gave birth to their daughter, Qing Chun. 1788. Shen Fu left official life in disgust after a unspecified incident at Qi Shi. He tried his hand at trade during this year but failed. His son, Feng Sin, was born, 1790. While Shen Fu worked with his father at Hengchang, Jung upset the family by mishandling arrangements to obtain a concubine for her father-in-law. 1792. This year they were expelled from the family after a misunderstanding which involved Jung with a loan that had not been repaid by Shen Fu's younger brother. They moved to a villa of serenity where they lived for a year and a half. It was during this period that Shen Fu left his profligate business trip to Canton. 1794. In the 7th month of this year, Shen Fu returned from Canton. Shortly after his return, the matter of the loan was cleared up and they were allowed to return home. 1795. They met Han Yan, the Sing Song girl. 1800. Shen Fu paid his visit to the abandoned Wu Yin temple. Late in the year, he and Yun were again expelled from the family after he once more got involved in a quarrel about a loan. And after the family had become upset over Yun's continuing friendship with Han Wan, at the end of the year, they moved to stay with friends. The Haws at Heshan and Yun saw their children, then aged 12 and 14, for the last time. 1801. The year of borrowing from Shen Fu's brother-in-law and a friend for most of this year and the next. Shen Fu worked at the Hanchang Yangzhou Salt Bureau, while Yun remained at Heshan. 1802. Yun's health improved, and she moved to join her husband at Yangzhou. Shortly after that, he lost his job. 1803. Yun sickened again and died at Yangzhou in the spring at the age of 40. 1804. Shen Fu's father died. Late in the year, Shen Fu visited the Yungtai Sands with his sharecropping friend Sa Yishan. 1805. In the first month of this year, he visited the Sea of Fragrant Flowers on Pu Mountain with Sa Yishan in September and became a retainer of his childhood friend Shi Cho Tang and began a journey with him to take up office in Sichuan. In 1806, the party wintered at Qingchon in Haipei province, then went on to Shangtung in the 10th month. Shen Fu heard by letter that his son Feng Xing had died. 1807. Shen Fu moved to Peking in the autumn when his patron Shi Cho Tang was assigned to the Hanlin Academy. While the text of the 6 records does not contain the information, it is known that Shen Fu in this year was appointed secretary to a diplomatic mission sent from the court in Peking to give Chinese recognition to a new king of the Ryukyu Islands. 1809. During the year Shen Fu was written, the 6 records, at the age of 46, nothing is known of his life after this. Weights and measures. It was only after the revolution that the Chinese truly began to unify their weights and measures. Standardization had begun in the mid-19th century with so-called treaty port measures, but these were adopted largely for purposes of foreign trade and had little relevance to the rest of the country, where a complex and often contradictory system of local customs and usages continued to apply. Shen Fu was writing some decades before even the treaty port measures were introduced. Moreover, so we would be misleading the reader if we offered the following as anything more than an approximate guide. The caddy. A caddy is customarily a measure of weight, standardized in the 19th century at 1 1/3 pounds. Shen Fu uses it as a capacity measure for wine. However, and as such, it is usually taken to be equal to a pint. The chang. One chang is equal to 10 Chinese feet. In treaties of the 19th century, the Chinese foot was defined as 14 English inches, which would make a chang equal to 11 feet 8 inches. The jin, an archaic measure equal to 7 Chinese feet and thus to 8 English feet by treaty port definition. The li. The length of the li, or a Chinese mile, has varied greatly with time, place, and circumstance. It is customarily taken to be about a third of an English mile. Frequently, however, the li was less a measure of distance than it was a measure of effort required to cover a given distance. An uphill road would measure more li on the ascent than it would on the descent. The mu, the Chinese acre, which is usually converted at the rate set by 19th century treaty in Shanghai as being equal to half of the English acre. By local practice, however, it could vary anywhere from a 15th to a third of an English acre. There are some indications that this variation may be accounted for by varying productivity of the land. At the time, the local standard was set. The real definition of a mu would thus be the amount of land required to produce a given yield, and a mu of high quality land would be smaller than a mu of low quality land. Local variations make this very difficult to establish with certainty. However, the stone, the piku, which could be either a capacity or a weight measure. Given the Chinese preference for weight measures, it seems to us that this is what is intended here, and as such, it was a standardized at 133 pounds. Its real meaning varied greatly from place to place, however. All romanization of Chinese names follows the Wade-Gill system. However, out of consideration for the general reader, we have omitted aspiration marks in the body of the text, while retaining them in the notes. We have given Chinese places names in English, only where we believe they will make some sense in translation. Wow, part one. The joys of the wedding chamber. I was born in the winter on the 27th year of the reign of Emperor Qian Lun on the 2nd and 12th day of the 11th month. Heaven blessed me, and life then could not have been more full. It was a time of great peace and plenty, and my family was an official one that lived next to the pavilion of the waves in Socho. As the poet Su Tung Po wrote, all things are like spring dreams, passing with no trace. If I did not make a record of that time, I should be ungrateful for the blessings of heaven. The very first of the 300 chapters of the book of Odes concerns husbands and wives, so I too will write of other matters in their turn. Unfortunately, I never completed my studies, so my writing is not very skilled. But here my purpose is merely to record true feelings and actual events. Criticism of my writing will be like the shining of a bright light into a dirty mirror. When I was young, I was engaged to Chen Sha Yu, but she died when she was 8 years old. Eventually, I married Chen Yun, the daughter of my uncle, Mr. Chen Sin Yu. Her literary name was Shu Chen. Even while small, she was very clever. While she was learning to talk, she was taught the poem, the Mandolin Song, and could repeat it almost immediately. Yoon's father died when she was 4 years old, leaving her mother, whose family name was Chin, and her brother, Ko Chang. At first, they had virtually nothing, but as Yoon grew older, she became very adept at needlework, and the labor of her 10 fingers came to provide for all three of them. Thanks to her work, they were always able to afford to pay the tuition for her brother's teachers. One day, Yoon found a copy of the Mandolin Song in her brother's book box, and remembering her lessons as a child, was able to pick out the characters one by one. This is how she began learning to read. In her spare moments, she gradually learned how to write poetry, one line of which was, "We grow thin in the shadows of autumn, but chrysanthemums grow far with the dew." When I was 13, my mother took me along on a visit to her relatives. That was the first time I met my cousin Yoon, and we two children got on well together. I had a chance to see her poems that day, and though I sighed at her brilliance, I privately feared she was too sensitive to be completely happy in my life. Still, I could not forget her, and I remember saying to my mother, "If you are going to choose a wife for me, I will marry no other than you." Mother also loved her gentleness, so she was quick to arrange our engagement, sealing the match by giving Yoon a gold ring from her own finger. This was the 39th year of the reign of Emperor Qing Lung, on the 16th day of the 7th month. That winter, Mother took me to their home once again for the marriage of Yoon's cousin. Yoon and I were born in the same year, but because she was 10 months older than I had always called her elder sister, while she called me younger brother. We continued to call one another by these names even after we were engaged. At her cousin's wedding, the room was full of beautifully dressed people. Yoon alone wore a plain dress. Only her shoes were new. I noticed they were skillfully embroidered, and when she told me she had done them herself, I began to appreciate her cleverness, lay not only in her writing. Yoon had delicate shoulders and a stately neck, and her figure was slim, her brows arched over beautiful, lively eyes. Her only blemish was two slightly protruding front teeth, the sign of a lack of good fortune. But her manner was altogether charming, and she captivated all who saw her. I asked to see more of her poems that day, and I found some had only one line, others 3 or 4, and most were unfinished. I asked her why. "I have done them without a teacher," she replied, laughing. "I hope you, my best friend, can be my teacher now and help me finish them." Then, as a joke, I wrote on her book, the embroidered bag of beautiful verses. I did not then realize that the origin of her early death already lay in that book. That night after the wedding, I escorted my relatives out of the city, and it was midnight by the time I returned. I was terribly hungry and asked for something to eat. A servant brought me some dried plums, but they were too sweet for me, so Yoon secretly took me to her room, where she had hidden some warm rice porridge and some small dishes of food. I delightedly picked up my chopsticks, but suddenly heard Yoon's cousin, Yu Hing, call, "Yoon, come quickly." Yoon hurriedly shut the door and called back, "I'm very tired. I was just going to sleep." But Yu Hing pushed open the door and came in anyway. He saw me just about to begin eating the rice porridge and chuckled, looking out of the corner of his eye at Yoon when I asked for for some more rice porridge? Just now, you said there wasn't any more, but I see you were just hiding it in here and saving it for your husband. Yoon was terribly embarrassed and ran out. The whole household broke into laughter. I was also embarrassed and angry, roused my servant, and left early. Every time I returned after that, Yoon would hide. I knew she was afraid that everyone would laugh at her. On the night of the 22nd day of the first month, in the 44th year of the reign of Emperor Chen Lung, I saw by the light of our wedding candles that Yoon's figure was as slim as before. When her veil was lifted, we smiled at each other. After we had shared the ceremonial cup of wine and sat down together for the wedding banquet, I secretly took her small hand under the table. It was warm and it was soft, and my heart beat uncontrollably. I asked her to begin eating, but it turned out to be a day on which she did not eat meat, a Buddhist practice where she had followed for several years. I thought to myself that she had begun this practice at the very time I had begun to break out with acne, and I asked her, since my skin is now clear and healthy, couldn't you give up this custom? Her eyes smiled amusement, and her head nodded agreement. That same night, the 22nd, there was a wedding eve party for my elder sister. She was to be married on the 24th, but the 23rd was the day of national mourning, on which all entertaining was forbidden, and the holding of a wedding eve party would have been impossible. Yoon attended the dinner, but I spent the time in our bedroom drinking with my sister's maid of honor. We played a drinking game, which I lost frequently, and I wound up getting very drunk and falling asleep. By the time I woke up the next morning, Yoon was already putting on her makeup. During the day, a constant stream of relatives and friends came to congratulate Yoon and me on our marriage. In the evening, there were some musical performance in honor of the wedding, after the lamps had been lit. At midnight, I escorted my sister to her new husband's home, and it was almost 3 in the morning when I returned. The candles had burned low, and the house was silent. I stole quickly into our room to find my wife's servant dozing beside the bed, and Yoon herself with her makeup off, but not yet asleep. A candle burned brightly beside her. She was bent intently over a book, but I could not tell what it was that she was reading with such concentration. I went up to her, rubbed her shoulder, and said, "You've been so busy these past few days. Why are you reading so late?" Yoon turned and stood up. "I was just thinking about going to sleep, but I opened the bookcase and found this book, The Romance of the Western Chamber. Once I started reading it, I forgot how tired I was. I had often heard it spoken of, but this was the first time I had had a chance to read it. The author really is as talented as people say, but I do think his tale is too explicitly told." I laughed and said, "Only a talented writer could be so explicit." Yoon's servant then urged us to go to sleep, but we told her she should go to sleep first, and to shut the door to our room. We sat up making jokes, like the two close friends meeting after a long separation. I playfully felt her breast and found her heart was beating as fast as mine. I pulled her to me and whispered in her ear, "Why is your heart beating so fast?" She answered with a bewitching smile. That made me feel a love so endless it shook my soul. I held her close as I parted the curtains and led her into bed. We never noticed what time the sun rose in the morning. As a new bride, Yoon was very quiet. She never got angry, and when anyone spoke to her, she always replied with a smile. She was respectful to her elders and amiable to everyone else. Everything she did was orderly and was done properly. Each morning when she saw the first rays of the sun, she touched the top of the window. She would dress quickly and hurry out of bed. as someone were calling her. I once laughed at her about it. This is not like that time with the rice porridge. Why are you still afraid of someone laughing at you? True, she answered. My hiding the rice porridge for you that time has become a joke. But I'm not worried about people laughing at me now. I am afraid of your parents will think I'm lazy. While I would have liked it if she could have slept more, I had to agree that she was right. So every morning I got up early with her, and from that time on, we were inseparable, like a man in his shadow. Words could not describe our love. We were so happy that our first month together passed in the twinkling of an eye. At the time of my father, the Honorable Chiafu was working as a private secretary in the prefectural government office at Quichi. He sent for me, having enrolled me as a student of Mr. Chao Xing Chai at Wunlin. Mr. Chao taught me patiently and well. The fact that I can write at all today is due to his efforts. I had, however, originally planned to continue my studies with my father after my marriage, so I was disappointed when I received his letter. I feared Yoon would weep when she heard of it, but she showed no emotion, encouraged me to go, and helped me pack my bag. The night before I left, she was slightly subdued, but that was all. When it was time for me to go, though, she whispered to me, there will be no one there to look after you. Please take good care of yourself. My boat cast off just as the peach and the plum flowers were in the magnificent bloom. I felt like a bird that had lost his flock. My world was shaken after I arrived at the offices where my father worked. He immediately began preparations to go east across the river. Our separation of 3 months seemed as if it were 10 years long. Yoon wrote to me frequently, but her letters asked me about me twice as often as they told me anything about herself. Most of what she wrote was merely to encourage me in my studies, and the rest was just polite chatter. I really was a little angry with her. Every time the wind would rustle the bamboo trees in the yard, or the moon would shine through the leaves of the banana tree outside my window, I would look out and miss her so terribly that dreams of her took possession of my soul. My teacher understood how I felt and wrote to tell my father about it. He then assigned me 10 compositions and sent me home for a while to write them. I felt like a prisoner who has been pardoned. Once I was on the boat, each quarter of an hour seemed to pass as slowly as a year. After I got home and paid my respects to my mother, I went into our room and Yoon rose to greet me. She held my hands without saying a word. Our souls became smoke and mist. I thought I heard something, but it was as if my body had ceased to exist. It was then the 6th month, a steamy hot in our room. Fortunately, we lived just west of the Pavilion of Waves, Lotus Lovers Hall, where it was cooler. By a bridge and overlooking a stream, there was a small hall called My Desire, because as desire once could wash my hat strings in it when it is clean, and wash my feet in it when it is dirty. Almost under the caves, almost under the eaves of the hall, there was an old tree that cast a shadow across the windows so deep that it turned one's face green. Strollers were always walking along the opposite bank of the stream. That was where my father, the Honorable Chia Fu, used to entertain guests privately, and I obtained my mother's permission to take Yoon there to escape the summer's heat because it was so hot. Yoon had given up her embroidery. She spent all day with me as I studied, and we talked of ancient times, analyzed the moon, and discussed the flowers. Yoon could not take much drink and would accept at the most 3 cups of wine when I forced her to. I taught her a literary game in which the loser had to drink a cup. We were certain two people had never been happier than we were. One day Yoon asked me, of all the ancient literary masters, who do you think is the best? The annals of the warring states and Chuang Tzu are are known for their liveliness, I replied. Quang Hing and Lu Shuang are known for their elegance. Shen Qing and Pan Ku are known for their breadth. Shang Li is known for his extensive knowledge, and Li Chao for his vigorous style. Lu Ling is known for his originality, and Su Sun and his 2 sons for their essays. There are also the policies, debates of Chia and Tung, the poetic styles of Yu and Su, and the imperial memorials of Lu Chiu. I could never give a complete list of all the talented writers. There have been, besides which one you like depends upon which one you feel in sympathy with. It takes great knowledge and a heroic spirit to appreciate ancient literature, said Jung. I fear a woman's learning is not enough to master it. The only way we have of understanding it is through poetry, and I understand but a bit of that. During the Tang Dynasty, all candidates had to pass an examination in poetry before they could become officials. I remarked clearly the best were Li Pai and Tu Fu. Which of them do you like best? Yun said her opinion was that Tu Fu poetry is very pure and carefully tempered, while Li Pai's is ethereal and open. Personally, I would rather have Li Pai's liveliness than Tu Fu's strictness, but Tu Fu was the more successful, and most scholars prefer him. Why do you alone like Li Pai? Tu Fu is alone, Yoon replied, in the detail of his verse and the vividness of his expressions. But Li Pai's poetry flows like a flower tossed into a stream. It's enchanting. I would not say Li Pai is a better poet than Tu Fu, but only that he appeals to me more. I smiled and said, I never thought you were such an admirer of Li Pai's. Yoon smiled back. Apart from him, there is only my first teacher, Mr. Pai Lo Ting. I have always had a feeling in my heart for him that has never changed. Why do you say that? I asked. Didn't he write the Madeline song? I laughed. Isn't that strange? You're an admirer of Li Pai's, and Pai Lo Ting was your first tutor. And as it happens, the literary name of your husband is Senpai. What is this affinity you have for the character Pai? Yoon laughed and said, since I do have an affinity for the character Pai, I'm afraid that in the future my writing will be full of Pai characters. Our Kangsu accent pronounces the character P as Pai. We both shook with laughter. Since you know poetry, I said, you must know the good and bad points of the form called Fu. I know it's descendant from the ancient Chu Zu poetry, Yun replied, but I have only studied it a little, and it's hard to understand. Of the Fu poets of the Han and Qin dynasties, who had the best meter and the most refined language. I think Sang Yu was the best. I jokingly said perhaps Wen Chun did not fall in love with Sang Yu because of the way he played the lute after all. But because of his poetry, the conversation ended with us both laughing loudly. I am by nature candid and unconstrained, but Yoon was scrupulous and meticulously polite. When I would occasionally put a cape over her shoulders or help her adjust her sleeves, she would invariably say, "I beg your pardon." If I gave her a handkerchief or a fan, she would always stand to take it. At first, I did not like her acting like this, and once I said to her, "Do you think that by being so polite, you can make me do as you like? For it is said that deceit hides behind too much courtesy." Yun blushed. Why should respect and good manners be called deceit? True respect comes from the heart, not from empty words. I said, there is no one closer to us than our parents. Yoon said, arguing with me now. But how could we merely respect them in our hearts while being rude in our treatment of them? But I was only joking. I protested. Most arguments people have begin with a joke, Yoon said. Don't ever argue with me for the fun of it again. It makes me so angry I could die. I pulled her close to me, patted her back, and comforted her. Her anger passed and she began to smile. From then on, the polite phrases, "How dare I," and "I beg your pardon," became mere expressions to us. We lived together with the greatest mutual respect for 3 and 20 years. And as the years passed, we grew ever closer. Whenever we would meet one another in a darkened room or a narrow hallway of the house, we would hold hands and ask, "Where are you going?" We felt furtive, as if we were afraid others would see us. In fact, at first, we even avoided being seen walking or sitting together. Though after a while, we thought nothing of it. If Yoon were sitting and talking with someone and saw me come in, she would stand up and move over to me, and I would sit down beside her. Neither of us thought about this, and it seemed quite natural. And though at first we felt embarrassed about it, we gradually grew accustomed to doing it. The strangest thing to me then was how old couples seemed to treat one another like enemies. I did not understand why, yet people said otherwise. How could they grow old together? Could this be true? I wondered. On the evening of the seventh day of the seventh month that year, Yoon lit candles and set out fruit on the altar by the pavilion of my desire, and we worshiped Tien Sun together. I had had 2 matching seals engraved with the inscription, "May we remain husband and wife in all our lives to come." On mine, the characters were raised, and on hers, they were incised. We used them to sign the letters we wrote one another. That night, the moonlight was very lovely, and as it was reflected in the stream, it turned the ripples of the water as white as silk. We sat together near the water wearing light robes and fanned ourselves gently as we looked up at the clouds flying across the sky and changing into 10,000 shapes. Yoon said, "The world is so vast, but still everyone looks up at the same moon. I wonder if there's another couple in the world as much in love as we are." Naturally, there are people everywhere who like to enjoy the night, the night air, and gaze at the moon. I said, and there are more than a few women who enjoy discussing the sunset. But when a man and wife look at it together, I don't think it is the sunset they will wind up talking about. The candles soon burned out, and the moon set. We took the fruit inside and went to bed. The 15th day of the seventh month, when the moon is full, the day called the Ghost Festival, Yoon had prepared some small dishes, and we had planned to invite the moon to drink with us. But when night came, clouds suddenly darkened the sky. Yoon grew melancholy and said, "If I am to grow old together with you, the moon must come out." I also felt depression. On the opposite bank, I could see Will o' the Whips winking on and off like 10,000 fireflies as their light treaded through the high grass and willow trees that grew on the small island in the stream. To get ourselves into a better mood, Yoon and I began composing a poem out loud, with me offering the first couplet, her the second, and so on. After the first two couplets, we gradually became less and less restrained and more excited, until we were saying anything that came into our heads. Yoon was soon laughing so hard that she cried and had to lean up against me. Unable to speak a word, the heavy scent of jasmine in her hair assailed my nostrils. So to stop her laughing, I patted her on the back and changed the subject, saying, I thought women of ancient times put jasmine flowers in their hair because they resemble pearls. I never realized that the jasmine is so attractive when mixed up with the scent of women's makeup, much more attractive than the lime. Yoon stopped laughing. Lime is a gentleman's of perfumes, she said, and you notice its scent unconsciously. But the jasmine is a commoner that has to rely on a woman's makeup for this effect. It's suggestive like a wicked smile. So why are you avoiding the gentleman and taking up with the commoner? I'm only making fun of gentlemen who love commoners, she replied. Just as we were speaking, the water clock showed midnight. The wind gradually began to sweep the clouds away, and the full moon finally came out. We were delighted and drank some wine, leaning against the windowsill. But before we had finished 3 cups, we heard a loud noise from under the bridge, as if someone had fallen into the water. We leaned out the window and looked around carefully. The surface of the screen was as bright as a mirror, but we saw nothing. We only heard the sound of a duck running quickly along the riverbank. I knew that the ghosts of people who had drowned often appeared by the river near the pavilion of the waves, but I was worried that Yoon would be afraid, and so I did not dare tell her. Ye, she said, nonetheless frightened for silence. Where did that sound come from? We could not keep ourselves from trembling. I closed the window, and we took the wine into the bedroom. The flame in the lamp was as small as a beam, and the curtains around the bed cast shadows that wreathed like snakes. We were still frightened. I turned up the lamp, and we got in bed, but Yoon was already suffering hot and cold attacks from the shock. I caught the same fever, and we were ill for 20 days. It is true what people say, that happiness carried to an extreme turns into sadness. The events of that day were another omen that we were not to grow old together. By the time of the Mid-Autumn Festival, I had just started to feel better, though I was still a little weak. Yoon had by this time been my wife for half a year without once going next door to the pavilion of waves. So one evening, I sent an old servant there to tell the gatekeeper not to let any other visitor in. Just as night was falling, Yoon, my little sister, and I walked there. 2 servants held me in along and another led the way. We crossed the stone bridge, went in at the gate, and took a small winding path along the eastern side of the gardens. There were rocks piled up into small artificial mountains and trees with luxuriant light green leaves. The pavilion itself stood on the top of a small hill. Steps led up to the summit, from where you could see all around for several miles. The smoke of cooking fires rose up from every direction into the brilliant twilight. On the opposite bank was a place called Chinshan Woods, where high officials would hold formal banquets. At that time, the Xingyi Academy had not yet been established there. We had taken along a blanket which we spread out in the middle of the pavilion, and we all sat around in a circle on it while the gatekeeper made tea and brought it up to us. A full moon soon rose above the trees, and we gradually felt a breeze beginning to tug at our sleeves. The moon shone on the stream below, and the quickly drove away our cares. This is such fun, said you. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a small skiff to row around in the stream down there? The time had come to light the lanterns, so still thinking of the shock we had received on the night of the Ghost Festival, we left the pavilion and went home, holding hands all the way. It is a Sochow custom that the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, women, regardless of whether they come from a well-off family or not, all come out into groups to stroll. This is called Moonlight Walk. But although the pavilion of the women's was elegant and peaceful, no one had come there that night. My father, the Honorable Shen Fu, liked to adopt sons, so I had 26 brothers with surnames different from mine. My mother, too, had adopted 9 daughters. Miss Wang, the second of them, Miss Yu, the sixth, got on best with Yoon. Miss Wang was a simple girl who enjoyed drinking, while Miss Yoon was open to love and loved to walk. Every time they got together, they would exile, and so that the 3 of them could sleep in the same bed. This was Miss Yu's idea. After you are married, I once joked with her, I will invite your husband over and make him stay at least 10 days. I'll come along to you, she replied, and sleep with your wife. Won't that be fun? Yoon and Miss Wang said nothing, but only smiled. At the time my younger brother Chi Tang's marriage, we moved to Granary Lane near the Drinking Horses Bridge. Although the new pavilion house was big, it was not as elegant as the one near the pavilion on the waves. For my mother's birthday that year, we had quite an opera troupe come to perform, and Yoon at first thought it was quite wonderful. My father had never been superstitious, however, so he had no compunctions about asking for the performance of the sad parting. The actors were excellent, and watching it, we were very moved. But while the performance was still going on, I saw Yoon suddenly get up from behind the screen where the women were seated and go to our room. After a long while, she had still not returned, so I went in there to look for her. Miss Yu and Miss Wang followed me. We found Yoon sitting alone beside the dressing table with her head in her hands. Are you unhappy about something? I asked. Seeing an opera is supposed to be entertaining, Yoon said, but today it is heartbreaking. Both Miss Yu and Miss Wang were laughing at her, but I told them they had to understand what a very emotional person she was. Still, Miss Yu asked her, are you going to sit here by yourself all day? When there's something I like, I'll go back and watch it. Yoon replied. Miss Wang went out as soon as she'd heard this and asked my mother to tell them to perform things like Si Lang and Who So. After some urging, Yoon came out to watch and soon began to cheer up. My father's cousin, the Honorable Su son died young, leaving no descendants, so my father named me to inherit from him. His prosperity and longevity and everything that I had to take Jung there to sweep the grave and perform rites. Second sister Wang had heard of a beautiful place on the mountain called Co Garden, and so she once asked to go along with us. That day, Yoon saw some stones on the mountain that were streaked with beautiful colors. If we put some in a bowl to make a little mountain, she said, they would look even better than the white stones from Xuan Chou. I told Yoon I feared it would have been hard to find enough stones to do that, but Miss Wang volunteered to collect them. She immediately went to the gravekeeper and borrowed a hempen bag, and then began collecting the stones, walking along as slowly and as deliberately as a crane. She would pick up each stone, and if one said good, she would keep it. If one said no, she would throw it. Before long, she was perspiring heavily and dragged her bag. She came back to and said, I don't have the strength to pick up any more. I've heard that if you want to collect fruit in the mountains, said Yoon, as she selected the stones she wanted, you have to get a monkey to do it for you. Now I foreknow that is true. Miss Wang rubbed her hands together furiously, as if she were going to tickle Yoon's in revenge for her joke. I stood between them to stop her and scolded Yoon. Miss Wang has been working while you have been relaxing, and you still talk like that? No wonder she's angry. On the other hand, we strolled through the co-garden where the fresh light, green leaves, and the delicate red flowers seemed to be competing over which was the most beautiful. Miss Wang always had been a foolish girl, and as soon as she saw the flowers, she thought she had to pick them. Yoon scolded her. You have no vase to put them in, and you're not going to put them in your hair either. Why are you picking so many? They feel no pain, Miss Wang said. So what's the harm? I laughed and told her, you are going to marry a pockmarked hairy fellow. That will be the flower's revenge. Miss Wang looked at me angrily, threw the flowers on the ground, and kicked them in a pond with her tiny foot. How can you make fun of me like this? She said. But Yoon joked with her, and her anger passed. When we were first married, Yoon was very quiet and enjoyed listening to me discuss things, but I drew her out as a man will use a blade of grass to encourage a cricket to chirp, and she eventually became able to express herself as the following conversation proves. Every day Yoon would make her rice with tea. She liked to eat a spicy, salty kind of bean curd that So Chow people called stinking bean curd. She also liked pickled cucumber. These last two were things I hated all my life. So one day I said to her, dogs have no stomach and eat dung because they do not realize how bad it smells. A beetle rolls in its dung so it can become a cicada because it wants to fly as high as it can. Which are you, a dog or a beetle? With either rice porridge or plain. I have eaten it since I was a child, as I am now living in your home. I'm like the beetle that has become a cicada. And the reason I still like to eat the bean curd is that I have not forgotten my former life. As for pickled cucumber, the first time I had it was here in your home. In other words, my house is a doghouse, I said, continuing to joke with her. Yoon was embarrassed and quickly explained, there is dung in every house. The only question is whether one eats it. I don't like garlic, but I still eat it because you like it. I would never ask you to eat stinking bean curd, but as for pickled cucumbers, if you would only hold your nose and eat some, you would realize how good it is. It's like the old stories about the girl named Wu Yin, who was ugly but virtuous. Now are you trying to get me to behave like a dog? I've been acting like a dog for a long time. Yoon said, why don't you try it? Upon which she picked up a piece of pickled cucumber with her chopsticks and forced it into my mouth. I held my nose and chewed, and it did seem quite good. I took my hand away and continued chewing, and to my surprise found it did have a rather special taste. From then on, I too began to enjoy eating it. Yoon also ate salted bean curd by pouring sesame seed oil and a little sugar over it. And that was wonderful. She would sometimes eat bean curd by making it with a paste of pickled cucumber. This she called double delicious sauce. And it was very good. One day I said to her, at first I did not like any of these things, but now I have to come to like all of them very much. I cannot understand why. If you like something, said you don't care if it's ugly. My younger brother, Chi Tang's wife, is the granddaughter of Wang Su Cho. As the time for their marriage approaches, she discovered she did not have enough flowers. Yoon took out her own pearls that she had been given when she was married and gave them to my mother for her to give to my brother's fiance. The servants thought it was a pity that she should give up her own jewelry. Women are entirely yin in nature. Yoon told them, and pearls are the essence of yin. If you wear them in your hair, they completely overcome the spirit of yang. So why should I value them? On the other hand, she prized shabby old books and tattered paintings. She would take the partial remnants of old books, separate them into all sections by topic, and then have them rebound. These she called her fragrant fragments of literature. When she found some calligraphy or a painting that had been ruined, she felt she had to search for a piece of old paper on which to remount it. If there were portions missing, she would ask me to restore them. These she named the collection of discarded delights. Yoon would work on these projects the whole day without becoming tired. Whenever she could take time off from her sewing and cooking, if in an old trunk or a shabby book she came across a piece of paper with something on it, she acted as if she had found something very special. Every time my neighbor, old lady Fung, got hold of some scraps of old books, she would sell them to Yoon. Yoon's habits and tastes were the same as mine. She understood what my eyes said. In the language of my brows, she did everything according to my experience, and everything she did was as I wished it. Once I said to her, "It's a pity that you are a woman and have to remain hidden away at home. If only you could become a man, we could visit famous mountains, you know, to search out magnificent ruins. We could travel the whole world together. Wouldn't that be wonderful?" "What is so difficult about that?" Yoon replied. "After my hair begins to turn white, although we could not go far as to visit the five sacred mountains, we could still visit places nearer. We could probably go together to Hufu and Lingyan and south of the west lake and north to Ping Mountain. By the time your hair begins to turn white, I'm afraid you will find it hard to walk," I told her. "Then if we can't do it in this life, I hope we'll do it in the next. In our next life, I hope you will be born a man," I said. "I will be a woman and we can live together again." "That would be lovely," said Yoon, "especially if we could still remember this life." I laughed. "We still haven't finished talking about the businesses with the rice porridge when we were young. If in the next life we can still remember this one. We will have so much to talk about on our wedding night that we will never get to sleep. People say that marriages are arranged by the old man of the moon," said Yun. "He has already pulled us together in this life, and in the next, we will have to depend on him too. Why don't we have a picture of him painted so we can worship him?" At that time, the famous poetess Chi Liu Ti, whose literary name was Chun, was having in Teosia, Teosi, and we asked him to paint the picture for us. He portrayed the old man carrying his red silk cord in one hand, while with the other he grasps his walking stick with the book of marriages tied to the top of it. Though his hair was white, his face was that of a child, and he was striding through mist and fog. This was the best painting that Mr. Chi ever did. My friend Shen Cho Tang wrote a complimentary inscription at the top of the painting, and I hung it in our room on the first and the 15 days of each month. Yoon and I would light incense and worship in front of it later. Because of the many things that happened to our family, the painting was somehow lost, and I have no idea in whose home it hangs now. Our next life is not known while this life closes. Our passion was great. Will the old man underestimate and help us once again? After we moved to Granary Lane, I called our upstairs bedroom the pavilion of my guest fragrance after Yoon's name. And the idea that husbands and wives should treat each other like guests. The new house had only a small garden and high walls, and there was nothing much more that we liked about it. At the back, there was a row of small rooms off the library, but when their windows were open, there was nothing to see but the overgrown Liu family garden, which was a desolate sight. It was from this time that Yoon began to miss the scenery at the pavilion of the waves. There was then an old woman who lived east of Chinmu Bridge and north of King Lane. Her cottage was surrounded by a vegetable garden and had gotten, you know, outside the gate there was a pond about 1 mu in size that reflected the interwoven images of the flowers and the shadows of the trees. The place was the site of the ruins of the palace that Chang Shi Qing had built at the end of the Yuan dynasty. Immediately to the west of her house, there was a pile of broken bricks as big as a small hill. And if you climbed to the top, you could see for a long time. A large area with few people and a great wild beauty. The old woman once spoke to the place to Yoon, who wanted very much to go and see it. Since we left the pavilion of the waves, she told me, I dream about it night and day. And as we cannot go back there, the only thing I can think of now is trying to find a substitute for it. What about this old woman's house? In the worst heat of the early autumn, I said, I think every morning of having a cool place to pass the long days. If you're interested, I'll have to look first and see whether the house is habitable. If it is, then we could take our bedding and stay there for a month. What would you think of that? So, my goal was to read a whole chapter, but with the introduction and the forward and all of that good stuff, I'm a few pages short. So, I'm going to stop on page 42. The second paragraph, I'll start and continue the reading. So just to give a recap, we're reading this novel called Shen Fu, 6 Records of a Floating Life. And I want to say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting this new venture for us on the channel. And I'm really enjoying it. So I'll see y'all tomorrow evening for another reading out of Shen Fu, 6 Records of a Floating Life. So thank you for tuning in. And I will make this live stream public for those that missed it. We'll see you at the next one. Good night.